Many of us have heard the Chinese proverb that may you be blessed to live in interesting times. Well, I think it's fair to say that we've made it. We're in interesting times. And it's not hard to see that these times are interesting. And they're not necessarily comfortable. Why aren't they comfortable? Because they challenge us. They challenge the ego. They challenge the patterns of energy that we've established to deal with the delusions of this world, with the Maya that comes to us. That's getting shaken up. And that shaking causes a little fear, a little anxiety. But more importantly, it causes us to redirect energy, to make some changes in our life, to decide what it is that's important, what it is we want to do, how it is we're going to go forward. And I think that's what the great blessing is, that the opportunity we have is to really take a look and be clear about what it is that we need to do. Be clear as what it is our energy, where it needs to go. And, maybe take a step back from those ego habits that we had that made it all look sort of normal. Because what does the ego do? The ego likes to look at the world, and even as we're on the spiritual path, the ego still likes to put things in understanding. It likes to categorize Maya. It likes to think it's in charge. And so, okay, all those things work. When that gets broken up, we have a chance to really look behind that and really question some things. What is the most incredible thing in the world? And the answer is that we live our lives surrounded by disease and death, yet we live our lives as if we were immortal. And isn't that true? We live all the time as if we are going to live forever, that this pattern is going to continue. Well, guess what? These interesting times have shaken us up a little bit. And they say, we are seeing disease and death a little bit closer up. We are starting to question, are we really immortal? Well, we're not. So how can this help us, these interesting times? Well, one thing is we're being forced to have a little bit more simplicity in our lives. And how often do we blame the restlessness of all the billboards, all the advertisements, all the traffic, the commute, the going back and forth, seeing all these things? How often do we blame that for our restlessness? Well, now's our chance that our universe is shrunk down. Most of us are pretty much inside our houses. It's a pretty simple universe. I mean, we're still doing some of our service. Many aren't. Many are doing new service, taking care of children in ways they've never have. But that simplicity of that life can really help us to establish new habit patterns, because the old habits, the old ways our energy went during the day aren't there anymore. So what are we going to do with that excess energy, or that change, that freed up, as Jyotish and Devi were talking about? Habits rule so much of what we do. Now's a chance where we can really look, where did that energy used to go, and where can I bring it back to now? And so the same forces of the world are still there. The forces of separateness, of delusion, satanic forces of anger, fear, greed, hatred, jealousy, anxiety. Those forces are there. They're being amplified in some ways by what's going on. But they're also, the forces of unity are there, the forces that bring us back to oneness, the forces for God. We have to remember that there's no disruption in the divine supply chain right now. There are no grace factories in China that are being put tariffs on and being shut down. There are no grace manufacturers in the Midwest who are dealing with outbreaks of illness in their workforce. The divine channels don't go through the usual supply chains. And that divine grace is always there. It's still flowing. Matter of fact, now it's probably more open than ever because it's drawing on us. And what disrupts the divine supply chain of grace? It's us. It's our restlessness. It's our lack of focus. It's our disruptive forces, anger, fear, greed, hatred, and jealousy. When we're in those, we're not able to receive that grace that comes. But when we're open to it, that divine grace is always there. We can always tune into it. We can always bring that into our lives. And there's some interesting things that start to happen maybe in this time in our lives, some things that we see that maybe we didn't see as we reestablish some habits. And because they're new, it gives us a chance to maybe be a little bit more cognizant, maybe to extract those tentacles of ego that make us seem this is normal and not question it. So as we change our habits and as we do new things with our time, let's be aware of, are we going towards unity? Is this bringing us joy? Or am I going towards separation? Is this taking me in the other direction? For example, a common thing, which many of us, myself included, seem to have gotten into is trying to stay up on what's going on. And we're taking in more media, more news, more things. Okay, what's happening in the world? What's going to go on? What's next? What's the next step? How does this work? And you have to ask yourself, okay, I just read this huge, long news feed. I just listened to the media. And what happened? Well, I might have gotten really a little anger at our commander-in-chief or at some other things that were the brunt of my anger. Does that help anything? Am I really going to change anything by being angry at the commander-in-chief? Probably not. And how do I feel when that happens? What's happening to my thing inside? Or when it's just really all too much and I have a Netflix subscription and it's all free and I can binge watch a whole season of Downton Abbey or West Wing or any of my favorite shows, and you know, I just need to disconnect, and I'm just going to do that. And 3 hours later or 5 hours later, how do I feel? How does that make me feel? Yeah, I've escaped for a while, but what's it do inside? Is that the right thing? Am I going towards separation? Am I going toward unity? Or am I just going down into a tamasic state? And let's look. I mean, I didn't used to binge watch 3 hours of things, so I can really see it. I have a comparison here. I did this is new. Is this a good thing? Okay, let's evaluate. Let's also evaluate, you know, I'm gonna raise my energy, I'm gonna meditate longer. I just did a 3-hour meditation. It wasn't easy because there's nothing sort of pushing me to do that. There's nothing helping me to do that, but I overcame that. I redirected energy that I had, and I did that. How did I feel after that? I just went out for a walk. I was walking with Divine Mother, looking at this beautiful spring weather we have here. How did I feel after that? Was that the right thing? Is that better than binge watching? I don't know. Just be aware. It doesn't mean you have to go all one way or another, but as we shift energy in this time, let's look at where that energy is going and what that does for us. Now, we might also find that there's some interesting things that come up, and this gets back a little bit to the reading that we were looking at today, of some very subtle things that we need to look at in our personality, that in the busyness and restlessness of every day, we may not be so aware of these things. But now in these special times, they can come a little bit more into focus. For example, how many times in the past have we said, you know, I am just way too busy serving. I've got way too much to do to really get in a nice long sadhana. And, you know, what I have to do is really important. And so my meditation isn't going to be as long. I'm going to, you know, I've got way too much to do. Well, guess what? Right now, we probably don't have as much left to do. So we could always think, yeah, I'm going to be meditating more. This was a sort of a wake-up call for me, not now, but some years back when my son was quite young and we were involved in raising, you know, child rearing and family and job, and it was a busy time. And at one point, Bhakti Marg and my son Mark took a trip to Spain, and I stayed home because I had to work. I was here doing these things. I didn't get to go. So I was thinking, oh, finally, I know I don't have the obligations of family. I'm just here by myself, and I'm going to meditate a whole lot more. I'm going to do all these things that my ego said I was wishing I was doing but didn't really want to do anyway. But all those things that I could have done, well, what happened? Did I really do a lot more meditation during that period? When they came back, I sort of wistfully looked back and said, you know, I didn't really take advantage of that as I did. I didn't really put out the energy to change a habit and rise up. My energy went somewhere a little bit more down. I started if I remember, I was watching sports on the Olympics or something, and that kind of took up some of my extra time. But so be aware, those excuses that you had before aren't necessarily there anymore. And just be honest with yourself. Which way am I going? Is it really the busyness, or is it just my restless nature that's keeping me from doing this? And even eliminating some of that restlessness, am I really able to go where I want to go, or how do I take those steps? There's another one that's sort of interesting, and it speaks again to this reading, and that's the influence of others. And it says, be aware. We so often get pushed one way or another by our environment, by people influencing us. Well, guess what? We're self-isolated. We don't have as much influence as we had before. We have a lot more control over that influence. But we can really say, okay, how much is it, that influence of others? We always have to be aware of what all those messages are saying to us. And as we filter a lot of those out of our lives, we can gain a little bit more awareness of what those messages were doing to us, how they were affecting us, how they were influencing what we said and did. And this can be in two ways. And I think for those of us who live in spiritual community or who have been connected with spiritual works can appreciate this. So we're both less influenced by those that are drawing us outward into materialism, which is good. Maybe it's your co-workers if you're working a job outside in the society. Maybe it's your family. Maybe it's your spouse or friends who aren't on the path, and they've faded away a little bit. You're not necessarily as in contact with them as you were. You're not necessarily being pushed by all the billboards out there and the materialism. But you also may not be being pushed as much by your spiritual friends, and you might be missing that support, that satsang, which is really important, that company with truth seekers of helping bring us into those helpful habits. And do we meditate as much when the people who we think might be watching us don't notice that we're not at morning meditation in the temple? I mean, nobody's really watching you, but there are these subtle things in our lives, these subtle influences from outside. As it says in the readings, ideally we need to get beyond all those influences, even if they're good influences, even if we're thinking this is what I should do. Again, we haven't really reached perfection until it doesn't even come up as a question. In the short term, the good influences aren't necessarily a bad thing, and we might want to do, if we recognize, nobody knows if I'm meditating or not, and guess what? My meditation fell off a little bit here. Well, we might want to get some of those influences back because that's pushing us in the right direction. And those influences could be having a meditation buddy, somebody who joins with you, somebody you're connected with, connecting with online communities. We have lots and lots of things going out from Ananda.org that you can keep connected. There's places all around the world. There's meditations that are still happening. These influences help us. And if we're not there yet to be completely on our own in seclusion and isolation, doing what we'd like to see ourselves doing, bring those influences back in. And what's important about this time is what we're doing may not be so visible to others. And is that little voice coming up about, yes, I was really kind to this person, or I did something, I was down at the mailroom and I, did something, or I pulled some weeds and nobody saw me. And, hey, nobody's really appreciating me. How come that's not going to work? Well, forget it. That's just the ego. I mean, it helps us to see, we still have a little bit of work to do. We're still trying to move in that direction of getting away from the ego, trying to grab credit for all these things we do. We should certainly still do all those things. We should still be humble. We should forget ourselves, not self-deprecation, self-forgetfulness. We should put those things out there. We should be looking for ways that we can serve, ways that we can help. We may just be praying for people. It may be offering your meditation. And you're probably not going to get the recognition that you might have used to. Or, if nobody sees you, is this still a spiritual act? Absolutely. God sees you in everything you do. And ultimately, that's the only outside opinion that is important. And it's just the ego. It's just the ego in there trying to grab credit for all these things that happen. So it's a chance. There's a window that's opened here that we can look at. So accept these opportunities with gratitude, that we have an opportunity to look a little bit. This crisis has opened a little bit of a window and we can look through it. We may not exactly like what we see all the time, but that doesn't matter. The important thing is that we're moving still, we can see things, and we can take this as an opportunity to see things that we may not have seen otherwise, that we can move forward on this path. And it's going to be a long journey, but I think we can say, let's look at these times we're in, these opportunities, as just saying, here's another chance to take a different perspective. Here's another chance to keep putting one foot in front of the other as we try to perfect ourselves and seeing God as a doer, as getting rid of the ego, as moving forward on the spiritual path. Let's just keep putting one foot in front of the other and see this for the great opportunity it is.